TJ Dillashaw turned into one of the more hated fighters in our beloved sport toward the latter stages of his career, but he's still someone everyone loved watching compete. From success as a high school wrestler, to an NCAA Division I competitor, to Tough 14 finalist, to UFC World Champion, to two-time UFC World Champion, to a 2-year suspension, to a 2-fight return. Continue watching to learn about the career of TJ Dillashaw. Before I get into today's video, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe to my channel if you'd like to see more resume reviews. Thus far, I've done them on Dricus du Plessis, Magomed Ankalaev, Shavkat Rakhmonov, Nickal, Anthony Johnson, Ilia Topuria, Sean O'Malley, Jack Della Maddalena, and now TJ Dillashaw. I'll link the others in the description below. The California native had a good tenure in freestyle wrestling back in high school in grades 11 and 12, going 45-7 as a junior, placing 5th in the state championships, before placing 2nd at states as a senior with a record of 52-6. At this point, TJ had gone 170-33 across 203 high school matches, and as such, he received a full-ride scholarship to an NCAA Division I college in his home state of California. Dillashaw didn't have quite the same success as a collegiate competitor on the mats as he did in high school, though this is where he met Mark Munoz. Mark Munoz, a UFC fighter at the time and 2001 Division I national champion, was TJ's head wrestling coach. Munoz of which encouraged him to begin training MMA, where he started practicing at Rain Training Center. Uriah Faber also saw potential in Dillashaw, and about 1 year after he started training MMA, he joined Team Alpha Male in Sacramento, California. After a successful 2-0 amateur stint, Dillashaw would turn professional in 2010. Debuting in March of this year, TJ would make it to 4-0 by the year's end with a unanimous decision victory in his pro debut, a pair of first-round rear naked chokes in his second and third bouts, and a third-round TKO in his fourth that improved him to 4-0 by November of 2010. He fought debuting opponents in both his first and second pro bouts, before fighting a 1-1 in his third and a 5-0 in his fourth. TJ would then join the cast of The Ultimate Fighter 14, going 3-0 on the show where he TKO'd 20-7 Matt Jaggers, submitted 6-1 Roland Delorme with a guillotine choke, and out-wrestled 10-4 Dustin Pig to a unanimous decision victory. The undefeated run on the show awarded him a crack at the Tough 14 trophy in December of 2011, where he was TKO'd by season winner John Dodson at 154 of round 1 in the finale. TJ quickly rebounded from this defeat with a dominant unanimous decision win over 9-3 YL Watson in February of 2012, absolutely mauling the fellow bantamweight throughout, securing 3 takedowns and outstriking him 154-19 across 3 rounds, the scoring totals being 30-25, 30-25, and 30-26. Dillashaw returned 5 months later in July, where he faced 12-7-1 Vaughan Lee, who was coming off an armbar submission win over Kid Yamamoto at the time. Lee was winning the exchanges on the feet, but Dillashaw secured a pair of takedowns, took his back after the second, and submitted him with a neck crank at 2:33 of the opening round. Not long after this fight took place, Uriah Faber hired former kickboxer and UFC fighter Duane Ludwig to be the striking coach at his gym, and drastic improvements were immediately shown by everyone in the gym, most of which started securing consecutive knockouts in their fights following. But no one improved quite like TJ. He and Duane showcased a fighter-coach relationship like very few we've seen, and the rest is history, really. Dillashaw head kick KO'd 7-3 Issei Tamura 26 seconds into round 2 of his next fight in March of 2013, and he'd only get better from here. Next up, TJ fought 7-0 Hugo Viana 1 month later in April, who, following a 2-1 run on the Ultimate Fighter Brazil, was at the time 2-0 inside the octagon. After eating a heavy left hook early, Dillashaw shot in on and secured a takedown. Viana would return to his feet eventually, getting caught with a hard right hand that dropped him momentarily. After returning to his feet, he'd get dropped again and swarmed, the referee stopping the fight at 4:22 of round 1, and TJ Dillashaw had now won his 4th straight fight inside the octagon. Dillashaw would next face 20-4 Rafael Assunção later that year in October, Assunção of which came in on a 4-fight win streak himself. This was a very, very close fight that could have gone either way. By the time the 3 rounds were completed, the striking totals were 37-32 in favor of the Brazilian, though TJ secured 2 takedowns on 4 attempts and stuffed all 6 of Assunção's. But it was Assunção that walked away the victor via split decision, with a pair of 29-28 scorecards going his way, and Dillashaw had suffered his second octagon defeat. Dillashaw returned 3 months later in January of 2014 to face 13-3 Mike Easton, who, following a 3-fight win streak to begin his UFC tenure, had since lost 2 straight. This was a fitting matchup to make at the time because both men were coming off split decision defeats, and both men had lost to Rafael Assunção over the course of the last year. Dillashaw got back on the winning track with a handed 30-27 unanimous decision victory after outstriking Easton in each round, 138-51 in total, and also securing 2 takedowns in their 15-minute affair. 1 month following Dillashaw's win over Easton, Assunção had defeated Pedro Munoz, improving his win streak to 6 straight, and he was granted a title shot at then-champion Renan Barral. Assunção was, however, forced from the bout with a rib injury the month of, and was replaced by TJ, who went into his title fight off just 1 win at UFC 173. Burrell came in as a near minus 1,000 favorite in this fight, and let me tell you, the odds makers got it wrong on this one. We all did. No one expected what was about to happen to the most dominant fighter in the world at the time, except TJ Dillashaw and Duane Ludwig. Burrell was 34-1 as a professional going into this fight to Dillashaw's 9-2, including a 9-0 run in the WEC and UFC with 6 finishes, and also including a 4-0 run in world title fights. Not to mention, the only fight Burrell had ever lost previous was his professional debut by decision, and he had gone undefeated for 9 straight years. But, as history would show, Dillashaw dropped Burrell with a nasty overhand right 4 minutes into the fight, and it was all TJ from here. His striking had improved immensely over the last year, but this was truly a breakthrough performance by him, one of the single-handed greatest performances ever. TJ continued to batter Burrell in rounds 2, 3, 4, and most of 5 up until he secured the finish at 2:26 of the 5th and final round, and he was now the UFC Bantamweight champion. Renan Burrell was literally the #1 ranked pound-for-pound fighter in the world at this point, having just recently surpassed his teammate and longtime featherweight champion Jose Aldo in the past year. TJ's footwork, angles, and wide array of strikes were just far too much for Burrell to handle. And this is a good example of how some fights just change people, because after opening up his career with an astounding record of 34-1, looking as unbeatable as a prime Anderson Silva, Burrell would go 2-8 over his next 10 contests, going out on a 6-fight losing skid. Dillashaw was expected to face Takeya Mizugaki at this event, but with the Sunsaw withdrawing from his main event slot with Burrell, it was TJ that shook up the entire division with his emphatic claim of the UFC Bantamweight Championship. Talk about closing in on an opportunity and rising to the occasion. An immediate rematch was expected to take place 3 months later at UFC 177, though Burrell fell ill the day of weigh-ins and was replaced by promotional newcomer and former Bellator featherweight champion Joe Soto, who was 15-2 as a professional, riding a 6-fight win streak with 5 finishes, and who was originally slated to face 11-1 Anthony Burchak at this event. Honestly, this whole event was cursed, with many fight cancellations resulting in just an 8-fight event including both the prelims and main card. Dillashaw handily outstruck Soto in each round, totaling 156-63, leading up to his second straight 5th-round KO stemming from a head kick. Though Soto wasn't per se deserving of the shot, it was still good to see TJ compete again, and it was also good to see him make the first defense of his title regardless of who it was against. Following this fight, Soto's bout with Anthony Burchak was rescheduled, where Burchak KO'd him in under 2 minutes. Soto would go on to lose his next, falling to 0-3 inside the promotion, before finally finding some success with a 3-fight win streak from 2016 to 2017. Dillashaw vs. Burrell 2 was then scheduled for UFC 186 in April of 2015, though Dillashaw withdrew due to a broken rib, the rematch eventually taking place a couple months later in July at UFC on Fox 16. Following medical issues from cutting weight for the rematch, the UFC made Burrell take another fight before fighting TJ again, where he submitted Mitch Gagnon with a 3rd-round arm triangle choke in December of 2014, snapping the Canadian's 4-fight win streak inside the octagon. So, instead of going right into the rematch off their first fight, each man came in off a late finish over another opponent before it finally happened 14 months following their first. Burrell landed a good left hook early on in the contest, and would stuff Dillashaw's initial takedown attempt. However, it started to go downhill for him again as the opening round went on, as TJ began piecing him up with beautiful combinations. After a good second round for the champion, he really began to beat on Burrell in the third. He wobbled Burrell badly with a left hook early on in the fourth, and went on to land over 20 unanswered strikes to secure the TKO victory 35 seconds into the round, and he was still the Bantamweight champion. Next, TJ fought the lineal champion of the division, the man Burrell was intended to unify his belts against prior, former WEC and UFC Bantamweight champion Dominick Cruz, 6 months later in January of 2016 at UFC Fight Night 81, his second non-pay-per-view title fight. Cruz had defended his belt twice in the WEC and twice in the UFC, totaling 4 straight title defenses, before he was eventually forced to vacate it due to a multitude of injuries that kept him out of competition for 3 years. Upon return, Cruz would KO top-ranked Takeya Mizugaki in a mere 61 seconds, his first finish since claiming the belt in 2010. And 15 months later, he returned off another injury once again to challenge for the belt that he never lost in a fight. Cruz was 20-1 as a professional with a win over that lone defeat. This was a great fight from start to finish, and also had a very exciting lead-up. Dillashaw and Cruz did not like each other, many words being said in the build, and it was a great example of the #1 fighter in the world facing the #2 fighter in the world. A back-and-forth masterpiece of a fight, in my opinion. Dillashaw had somewhat adopted Cruz's fighting style over the last few years, with Duane Ludwig's twist, of course, utilizing elite-level footwork, striking, and solid wrestling, though he was far more dangerous with his tools than Cruz was. TJ came out very aggressive in this one, whereas Cruz, the master of footwork he is, evaded many of the strikes coming his way and countered with a lot of his own in the opening round. TJ went for the head kick a lot in this fight, landing one in the second, and also landed a lot of solid leg kicks early. He got overzealous in the second, however, and was taken down in back-to-back sequences by Cruz, which probably lost him the round after the first was incredibly close. Cruz did a good job of evading more of Dillashaw's strikes in the third. TJ once again went back to the leg kicks, and after landing a couple, Cruz caught one and again put him on his back. TJ landed a strong leg kick in the fourth that appeared to have a sizable impact on Cruz, who immediately shot in on and secured another takedown. TJ secured a takedown of his own as the round went on and controlled Dominic along the fence for a time, having a strong end of the fourth. Dillashaw continued to land effective strikes onto Cruz, who landed a few good combinations himself through the fifth and final round. In my opinion, Cruz won the first 3 rounds, though just barely, and I gave TJ the fourth and fifth. Cruz was certainly Dillashaw's trickiest opponent to date, and TJ was a tough opponent for himself as well. Cruz got hit more in this fight than he ever had previous. Once the fight came to a close, the scoring totals were 48-47 Cruz, 49-46 Dillashaw, and 49-46 Cruz, with Dominic Cruz ultimately recapturing his belt via split decision following a truly epic 5-round fight. The striking totals were 130-22 in favor of TJ, with Cruz securing 4 takedowns to TJ's 1. Following the loss of his title, instead of giving him an immediate rematch, the UFC decided to give number 1 ranked Dillashaw a rematch with number 3 ranked Rafael Assunção later that year in July at UFC 200, Assunção of which came in on a 7-fight win streak this time. Dillashaw, having 2 more years to train with Duane Ludwig, showed off his superior striking in this one, outstriking Assunção 72-52 in total strikes, and also securing a single takedown en route to his universal 30-27 unanimous decision victory. Just as we thought he'd be the next to challenge Dominic Cruz for the belt in a rematch, the UFC booked TJ, still ranked at number 1, against number 2 ranked John Lineker in December of 2016 at UFC 207. Lineker, perhaps the hardest hitter in bantamweight history, came into the bout at 29-7 on a 6-fight win streak, having gone 4-0 since moving up to 135 pounds from the flyweight division. TJ never gave Lineker a chance to get started in this one, securing his first takedown just under 2 minutes into the fight, ultimately securing 5 throughout their 3-round affair and outstriking him 177-51. At the same event, Dominic Cruz surprisingly lost his title to Cody Garbrandt. Thus, once TJ was finally given another title shot, it wasn't a rematch with Cruz. Instead, it was a former teammate turned bitter rivals grudge match. TJ and Cody coached the Ultimate Fighter 25 against one another leading up to their fight, one of the better seasons in the series' history. After the show was finished airing, finally, TJ Dillashaw was in another title fight at UFC 217. Garbrandt was a perfect 11-0 with 9 knockouts going in, including a 6-0 run in the UFC, and he was 32-0 as an amateur boxer. Cody was also a state champion wrestler in high school as a freshman and a runner-up as a sophomore. Despite not competing on the mats as a junior or a senior, Garbrandt was still offered wrestling scholarships from several NCAA Division I schools, including Penn State, which he turned down in order to continue boxing. He really was an incredible, well-rounded, complete fighter, and his hand speed, power, and athleticism were just unmatched. So, after a previous sparring session of these two was leaked, many thought Cody was going to be a tough fight for TJ. Cody was on paper the better wrestler and the more experienced striker of the two. Ironically enough, despite being ranked at number 1 since losing the title, Dillashaw got his crack at Cody while ranked at number 2, being behind Cody and Dominic Cruz. After Cody landed a good combination midway through the opening round, TJ found himself in trouble in the final seconds of it when Cody dropped him with a thunderous overhand right, which looked exactly like their sparring session that was leaked. After wobbling his way back to his corner, TJ recovered well during their 60-second intermission. Garbrandt came out incredibly confident following round 1, perhaps too confident, as he ate a head kick that floored him about 90 seconds into the second. About 1 minute later, TJ landed a picture-perfect right hook in the midst of a combination, again dropping the champion, following up with some ground and pound this time to reclaim his title at 241 of round 2. An immediate rematch would take place 11 months later in August of 2018 at UFC 227, where TJ absolutely dominated Garbrandt, hurting him multiple times en route to his KO win at 4:10 of round 1. It's ridiculous, really. TJ arguably won his fight with Dominic Cruz to many, a lot of fans thinking he should have been the champion the whole time, and still had to take 2 more fights and win both in order to get another crack at the belt. Meanwhile, Garbrandt gets knocked out and got another shot right away off a knockout loss. Honestly, this is probably the fight that ruined Cody's career. He took so much damage in this one, and after going 0-2 against one person, being knocked out in both encounters, his confidence just wasn't the same anymore, and neither was his fight IQ. Following the first defense of his second reign, Dillashaw would drop down to 125 pounds and attempt to become a 2-division champion against Henry Cejudo, who had just won his rematch with Demetrius Johnson to claim the flyweight belt in UFC 227's co-main event. This bout took place at the UFC's first ever ESPN event in January of 2019. This one didn't last long, as TJ was bullied around the cage en route to his 32-second TKO defeat. Most of us at the time were screaming early stoppage, and really, it was. He should have been given more time to recover, especially considering it was a world title fight. But nonetheless, he wasn't. But hey, he was still the UFC's Bantamweight champion, right? Wrong. He failed his pre-fight drug test going into this fight, testing positive for EPO, and he was soon after stripped of his title and suspended for 2 years by USADA. At 33 years of age as a bantamweight, the future of TJ Dillashaw was looking quite dim. It was a death sentence to his career that he never fully recovered from. After the MMA fanbase was enlightened of how EPO works, knowing that it's not a steroid, but an endurance enhancer, not to mention it must be injected in order to be used, we knew there was no chance of it being a tainted supplement, and we knew that he was guilty of the accusation. He later came out and admitted to his wrongdoing, which garnered him some of his fans back. Now unranked after not fighting for 2.5 years, Dillashaw finally returned to the cage in July of 2021 to face number 2 ranked Corey Sandhagen, who was 14-2, including a 7-1 run in the UFC. Despite him being a cheater, I was still a huge TJ Dillashaw fan, and this matchup really worried me for him. TJ, though a great striker, always showed the ability to get hit in his fights, and Corey Sandhagen is one of the more creatively dangerous strikers in the entire sport. I really thought TJ was going to get knocked out cold in this one, but the time off certainly aided his chin and durability. Sandhagen cracked him with a good right hand early on and immediately followed up with a flying knee that landed perfectly, but Dillashaw ate it and caught it, where he tried to take Corey down but was locked into a reverse triangle choke. Dillashaw escaped it, however, and spent some time in top position before the two got back to their feet. After securing another takedown, TJ rained down some good punches from top position, but got his leg locked up by Sandhagen, which ended up tearing some ligaments in his knee. TJ got busted up pretty bad in the second, getting dropped on one occasion, and suffering a bad cut over his right eye that caused the referee to call the doctor in. Sandhagen landed another flying knee followed by a punch combination once the action resumed, though TJ was able to slow the fight down in the final minute of the second by grabbing and controlling him along the fence. To his credit, TJ continued pressuring Sandhagen, though he ate some good shots earlier on in the third. He'd begin to land a number of leg kicks as the round went on, secured another takedown, and also stuffed Corey's lone takedown attempt in this 5-minute stretch. Dillashaw began round 4 where he left off in the third, kicking the lead leg of Sandhagen. He accumulates a lot of control time in this round as well, and also ate a heavy spinning back fist in the final seconds of the round. The former champion continued pressuring Sandhagen throughout the 5th and final round, though being outstruck, eating a few really solid shots in the process. TJ Dillashaw was ultimately awarded the split decision victory, the scoring totals being 48-47 Sandhagen and 2 48-47s for Dillashaw, with the striking totals being 171-169 in favor of Sandhagen. A lot of fans were upset with this decision, though I for one was happy that he got the nod in it. All the adversity he went through, from being suspended to not fighting for 2.5 years, to tearing his knee in the opening round of a 5-round fight against a very dangerous opponent, an opponent of which opened up a nasty cut on him in round 2, just another thing TJ had to battle through in this one. Most of us can at least agree, while Corey may have won the fight, TJ won the match. Though the knee injury he acquired in this fight kept him out for over a year following, TJ, much like Cruz had after his win over Mizugaki, finally returned to the octagon a 1.5 years later in an attempt to become a 2-time UFC Bantamweight champion, and also to reclaim a belt they never lost in a fight. There were a lot of parallels between Dillashaw and Cruz actually, the only difference being that Cruz did indeed recapture his title, where Dillashaw failed in his attempt against then-champion 23-3 Aljamain Sterling at UFC 280. Aljo didn't give him much of a chance to get going at all, catching a kick thrown by Dillashaw and putting him on his back in the opening minute. He beat the absolute piss out of TJ from top position, raining down heavy punches as TJ's shoulder dislocated. He was eventually able to get back to his feet, but was taken down again before they headed into a second round. Visibly a one-handed fighter going into round 2, Sterling capitalized with another well-timed double leg. TJ again made it back to his feet, but was dragged back down, mounted, and beat on from top position. The referee eventually forced to stop the fight at 3:44 of the second. Though he'd lost a lot of fans over the years, for leaving Team Alpha Male and the grudges he went on to have with a lot of members of that gym, to being suspended for cheating, I still feel like no one wanted it to go this way. He was more or less a defenseless fighter from the opening couple minutes of the fight, and was still trying to land that one shot when he was on the feet. Not to mention the adversity he dealt with in his last fight, his first performance in over 2 years after coming off PEDs. Still, he looked good in it, the Sandhagen fight that is, but I will say this, he fought quite flat-footed against Corey Sandhagen, and I think that could have been to reserve energy, something he perhaps wasn't used to having to do. There's a lot of people out there that think TJ abused PEDs for more than just his Henry Cejudo fight, and I myself have also wondered. The giant leap in performance to me was his Mike Easton fight to his first-time Barral fight. Though he handily beat Easton, the Barral performance was just legendary, and we were all wondering how. I'm not saying I think he abused them since then, I really have no idea, but when your own former teammate calls you out for it, not to mention names the exact drug that you popped for, it definitely raises questions. It's just to think, Renan Barral was only 27 years of age when he and Dillashaw first fought, We expected him to be atop the divisional and pawn-for-pawn rankings for years and years to come. Then, of course, there were the two Cody Garbrandt fights, Garbrandt of which was undefeated going into their first, and also just 26 years of age. Whether he was abusing EPO at that point or not, I'm not certain, but he did certainly ruin those two careers. It's just a shame we don't know if it was entirely skill or the result of him doing forbidden substances, a feat of which would ultimately ruin his own career. Regardless of what you feel about TJ Dillashaw, there is another thing that made him great, and that's the mean streak he had. TJ had a reputation for being a rough teammate. He even ended Chris Holdsworth's career early with a concussion he gave him during practice. Holdsworth of which was a very promising, undefeated Ultimate Fighter winner that has become one of the greater what-ifs in MMA history. TJ carried this attitude inside the octagon. He truly wanted to hurt his opponents, and far more often than not, it really worked for him. Of TJ's 5 career losses, the first came to John Dodson via TKO, which in my opinion could be considered an early stoppage. Not to mention he was so young in his career at this time. Then there's his next 2 losses, both of which were split decisions, one of which he ended up avenging. His next loss came to Henry Cejudo, also widely considered an early stoppage, and his 5th and final defeat came in a title fight he was injured going into at 36 years of age. He was also never submitted, which is a feather to put in any professional fighter with 22 fights as cap. It's a shame he had over 2 years of his mid-30s taken away from him. Like, I know he deserved it, but it's still a shame. He would have fought Marlon Moraes had he not been suspended, and that would have been an absolutely massive fight. He would have fought Peter Yan. Again, a massive, massive fight. And maybe even Jose Aldo. I mean, could you imagine? As it currently sits, TJ Dillashaw is arguably considered the greatest bantamweight of all time. I, for one, still think Dominic Cruz is the best bantamweight ever, but it's debatable. I'm just thankful Dwayne Ludwig joined Team Alpha Male's coaching staff for that short time, because he made one of my favorite fighters to ever watch compete in doing so, and he just may have created the best 135-pound fighter mixed martial arts has ever seen. A criticism that could also be said is that TJ never won more than 4 straight fights throughout his entire career, unless you count his Ultimate Fighter and or amateur fights. Considering tough fights or exhibitions, he made it to 4-0 as a professional before losing for the first time. He'd climbed to 8-1, lost. He went from 8-2 to 12-2, lost. He went from 12-3 to 16-3, lost again, and then went 1-1 upon his return in 2021. Even though there could be a case for him winning 7 straight fights to open up his pro career, he did beat 3 pro fighters on the Ultimate Fighter 14. And even though there could be a case for him winning the first Asuncao and Cruz fights, which would have made it 14 straight for him, luck just wasn't on his side. TJ Dillashaw left the sport with a record of 17-5, having fought in 8 world title fights across 2 divisions and becoming a 2-time UFC Bantamweight champion. Despite the asterisk, that's not a bad career. That about does it for this video. If you enjoyed it, please remember to hit that like button and subscribe to my channel, maybe even tap the notification bell, and check out my last one I did on Della Maddalena here.